American culture is known for its work ethic, or at least that was true at one point. From the early colonial years throughout much of our history, people have recognized how much a culture of working has contributed to making our economy the envy of other nations. In fact, in America, people identify with their work to a great degree, far more than what in many other places. If you were asked, what do you do? We will respond with our occupation or our employer, more often than not, about this is what we are and things that we do as people. For many people, then, their work is their identity. Sometimes it's a general description like, well, I'm an accountant or I'm an engineer. Sometimes it's tied specifically to a company. I work for Dell, a certain school district, Chick-fil-A. And in this, we have identity as we work and spend our time. But if I were to change the context and limit it to just the church, just being a Christian, how would you respond? What do you do? For many, the answer would be, we worship. And that certainly should be a highlight of every Christian's life. But a Christian is not simply to worship God, he is also to be a worker for God. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. Work, activity, Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 and 13. But whenever we talk about work in a spiritual context, we typically discuss three aspects of the work of the church that are found in Scripture: evangelism, edification, and benevolence. And these three are indeed what we should do collectively. There is no question about that. However, most of the time, we view these works with an almost business or even government type of lens. And that is, we pool our money together, we put those things together, and because of that, some entity invests in them and things are done and accomplished. We believe that if we've given money to the church, and if the church has a line item in the budget that addresses all three areas, then we have participated in the work of the church. Now, I don't want to downplay the importance of giving, not at all. It's essential for the work of the church. But it is not to be confused with the work of a Christian. So today I want us to consider what the work of a Christian really is at its core and how that should look in your life. So, first of all, number one, think in terms of personal spiritual activity. Personal spiritual activity. Paul most certainly did. When he wrote to the Thessalonians, he referred not simply to their change in beliefs, but specifically to their change in behavior. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 3, remembering without ceasing your work of faith, labor of love, and patience of hope in our Lord Jesus Christ in the sight of God our Father. For Paul, then, the natural offspring of hope is patience. The child of love, and the product of faith is work. However, over time, we have come to conflate our congregational activity and our personal activity. And in the process, we can mistake our financial support as sufficient involvement in the spiritual work of the church. And we think then that we get moral credit for all the collective activity of the congregation as a result of this. And that is, as long as we're part of the congregation, then whatever that congregation is doing, then God's given me credit for too. That's not how it works. We are expecting our church membership to do a whole lot of lifting, heavy lifting on Judgment Day, if that's the way we think. That if I'm just sitting in the right pew in the right place, that whatever everyone else is doing in the pews around me counts for me too. I mean, that's a form of welfare that the government can't even handle. As Paul pointed out, God will render to each one according to his deeds, Romans chapter 2 and verse 6. And that's why we must evaluate ourselves according to our personal contributions in the work, not by the work as a whole. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, get involved in the efforts of the local congregation. That's where we ought to start. Get involved. Volunteer to help in as many different ways as you can. Ezra 7 verse 3, the emphasis there on their willingness to volunteer, in that case, to go and live in Jerusalem. They were volunteering to go back, leave Babylon, go back to Jerusalem, their homeland in Judea, and live there in a much worse condition. It was the willingness to take on additional responsibilities and effort to do something because these are my people and this is who I am. But a lot of times that's not enough, and we need to recognize it. So I want to be practical about this too. You need to find a friend and work together. You know, in Luke chapter 10, verse 1, when Jesus sent out the 70, he sent them out in twos, in pairs. Why? Because, number one, it's for personal protection. It's for company. It's for strength. It's for encouragement. When you work together with someone else, the time passes far more quickly. You realize you're not alone in it, and it becomes far more of an enjoyable activity. I will say that working in different things with brethren over the years has been some of the fondest memories I hold. When I had the opportunity to go ahead and work alongside a deacon as he is going through and doing kind of work I had never done in my life. We're stringing cable and we're placing boards and we're putting things up in a remodel. I once held the line, that was my role as a helper, as we spray the ceiling. Now, any of y'all who ever done that know what you look like when you're done. Okay? But what? I was helping him, and we got to talking about all sorts of things and became friends because we were doing work together for the Lord. And we became close, and we had very little in common other than that. But that was enough. We often overstate the value of fellowship meals in bonding as God's people and undervalue the power of working side by side in the kingdom for what it will do. But if you're going to do this, and I hope you will, you need to begin with things in your comfort zone. Don't just stretch too far. You start in your most comfortable areas. I'm just saying don't let your involvement end there. Don't stop with what you're comfortable with. The whole idea is you learn to be more comfortable over time. We've become so used to specialization in society that we think we can choose some tiny little sliver of church work that fits us perfectly and we call it good. We've done our part. Why? Because that's the part that I enjoy, that I'm good at, and that I've done my due. And we're done. But spiritual work is designed not only to accomplish something good in the kingdom, but also something good within you. You will benefit and grow from the effort to participate and do things that are beyond what you're used to doing. But that means you have to be willing to offer to learn a new skill. There are a number of things helping out. One of my first I remember, I was being on the top of a roof and helping to repair a roof. Now, of all the things of which I know, that's not one of them. But I got up there and I learned something about it. In the same way, helping to put in windows in a church building years ago. You offer to learn a new skill because they need help. It doesn't take everyone being the expert. It takes people who are willing to learn too. No one starts off as an expert. Most of the time we're learning on the job. Start now so you can have a head start on the future. Now, with this in mind, every role in the Lord's church needs an experienced hand and someone learning to do the job. When we function best, it's when we're always training the next generation. Where someone who knows what is doing takes someone under the wing and says, I'm doing this now. I want you to be able to learn to do it. We need more than one person here who knows how to do those things. I mean, there is a possibility that some point in this congregation, no one will know how to turn these lights out. The memory is going to be lost. It's a select few that know. We don't think sometimes that there's certain jobs that people have that they're the only ones that ever do. That also means we must allow people into what things we're doing and let other people help us. And not be territorial about the things that we're doing. Mentor your brethren. Pay attention, though, also in areas where the work is struggling, and look for areas that need help. There's an area where you can now participate and help no matter what, because there's a need. And if you're already working in an area that's struggling, get help. But to make this all work, if it's going to be personal in your involvement, there's something else that goes with this. You have to put your heart into the work. In Colossians 3, verse 23, and the context there is just work in general, but it says, and whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men. Now, brethren, if we're to take a job that is just for this world, your day-to-day job, and we're to do that for the Lord, what should we do with a job that is directly designed to benefit the Lord's church? Sometimes we will do our work in the workplace to the Lord and heartily, and we'll do our work for the Lord in the church grudgingly. And that's not right. We need to have a heart for the work, and that needs to be more than just the economics of it. It's the process of it. Matthew chapter 6, 19 through 21. Lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust doth corrupt, where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. See, when we value the church and the work of the church, our heart will be in the work. And that's what we need to be about. And that means we work enthusiastically so that in Titus chapter 2, verse 14, we will truly be a people zealous of good works. Make spiritual activity, then, the defining part of your life. Did you remember there in Ephesians 2, read in your presence? Everything we do is building on what God did first. The whole point there is the grace of God providing all of this, providing the means, getting it to us, and then saying, here's where you need to take over now and work. And from that point then, we are to be his workmanship, and that is defined by the product of God's work that then take on the character of his work in our work. So that everything that is done and accomplished is ultimately pointing back to him, looking to him, and reflects him. This is the kind of heart that pleases God while preparing for eternity. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 18 and 19. Let them do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share, storing up for themselves a good foundation for the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. Second of all, make helping others a specific part of your daily life. Make helping others a specific part of your daily life. There are two very different phenomena that have affected how we view the very word benevolence. And you just stop and think about what you think of and what pops into your head when you see the word benevolence. The big budget charities that rake in donations that are then split between payroll and handouts have either made people leery of benevolent works completely, or they've convinced people that a small financial contribution is enough to ease the conscience. It's kind of what has happened. On the other hand, the number of people who travel this country, often going from church to church with a smooth-sounding sob story, asking for a financial handout, makes those who can recognize the con when they see it less likely to give money to anyone. Now, you notice those two things can create a problem if we're really wanting to be a people who help, because we become cynical. We tend to think benevolence is charity. Charity is a handout. Handouts are welfare. Welfare encourages laziness. Laziness should not be rewarded. Therefore, benevolence is a bad idea. That's the string of thinking. But that has multiple issues that we need to address in our own thinking. First, it assumes that all benevolence involves a financial transaction. Do you notice how much we have just simply equated benevolence with economics and finances? It even goes and plays into some doctrinal differences with some congregations, that it's all about what goes to the treasury. You take the treasury out of it, all of a sudden, the arguments all of a sudden are hard for them to make. But that's a problem. Second of all, it overgeneralizes the problem because it creates cynicism and distrust in general, and justifies not doing anything at all on the basis of people doing the wrong thing. Thirdly, it excuses Christians from what is actually a God-given responsibility. Fourth, it keeps us from seeing real needs even when they're right in front of our eyes, because we've closed off our hearts to help. And therefore it doesn't matter what we see. And that means we need to take a step back from our own assumptions before we'll be able to do what God says to do. So, brethren, it's time to retrain your brain in how you see benevolence. Peter describes Jesus' entire life as going about doing good in Acts chapter 10 and verse 38. That is actually what benevolence means. Good doing. Does that sometimes require money? Certainly. But first it requires a mindset. Jesus did not carry the cash, but he did far more good than the person who did. We need to have a mindset that sees people instead of dollar signs. That we're not looking for their money, and we're looking not simply for them to see us as money either. We're trying to reach them at a far more important level, on a personal level of what we can do to help them. Not what I can give to them, what I can do for them. It means considering what we can do soul to soul instead of checking account to checking account. And convincing other people that we care to that level is a key at their understanding where we're coming from. Therefore, we must start simply by helping people where and how they need help. We must stop looking at helping people as something we do when asked, and instead start seeing people's needs and acting. And this begins by simply relearning good manners and basic kindness. Things that other people look at as quaint from a bygone era. It's amazing to me to watch the person struggling carrying something and how rare it is for someone to open the door for them. It's a clear need. But we're a society that can't seem to find the place to put the shopping cart back. That's somebody else's problem. And as a result, we don't help. It means that we stop saying, that's not my job. And instead, we see opportunities to help people who may be overwhelmed for things that are not their job either. When Paul described the widow indeed, he characterized her in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 10 as well reported for good works. If she has brought up children, moms, I want you to notice that. That's good works. If she has brought up children, if she has lodged strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work. In short, this was a woman who saw a need and met a need to the best of her ability. It doesn't say that she gave anyone money. It's doubtful she had that opportunity or means. But she did what she could. And this verse begins with good work and ends with good work. But helping others requires being highly aware of what other people need. It means you have to pay attention. And that is really what mercy is. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 7. The fact is that we often think in terms of what we want to give rather than in terms of what people really need. And that means we're still thinking too much about ourselves and not enough about others. That's that old joke about the man who was a really bad gift giver. And he couldn't understand why his wife didn't appreciate the chainsaw she got for their anniversary. Because he found it very useful. We need to make sure that we're not thinking in terms of what we want, but really think about the other person. You know by intuition what you like, what you enjoy, what you'd appreciate. It takes a lot more time and consideration to think about what someone else needs and would appreciate. Dorcas simply made clothes for people. But that very provision was needed desperately by the impoverished, and it restored their dignity. Acts chapter 9, verse 36. Children may need a new home and perhaps additional support for the family that's willing to take them in, which is still the best way to do that. Widows could need a number of things that her husband previously provided, whether financial support, chores done, some guidance, or just the company. But that's what James chapter 1, verse 27 is talking about. It says, visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. The word visit means take care of. It's helping them in all these ways. That's doing good. Those who have wandered away from Christ have a deep spiritual need, and no money can help them. But spiritual people can listen to them, talk to them, help them, guide them, and love them in seeking to restore a soul back to God. Galatians chapter 6, verse 1. James chapter 5, verses 19 and 20. We would not typically put that in the category of benevolence, but it's doing good. And that's part of my point. We have put the work of the church in carefully selected silos to the point where important works of a Christian have been lost in the shuffle. This is not some random occurrence overtaken that we do to feel better about ourselves. That's what kind of benevolence has become in this country. This is not visiting some out-of-the-way place. Oh, they need a lot of help over here. We're talking about simply living our Christianity. In Luke chapter 6, 27 through 36, in the Sermon on the Plain, Jesus put this kind of activity, all this helping, loving people, caring, doing what's needed, and at the close, he says, be ye therefore merciful, even as your Father in heaven is merciful. He looks out and sees what we need, and he provides it. And so should we. Thirdly, infuse your interactions with spiritual purpose. Infuse your interactions with spiritual purpose. It requires a change of how you think. Many people live their whole lives passively. They're feeling helpless in their circumstances and reacting to what happens around them, instead of taking deliberate action to affect those circumstances. And now, changing this, that requires some confidence, to be sure. But it is at the heart of every act of faith recorded in Scripture, to realize that by faith in God and doing his will, I can change the circumstance. But Christians should move beyond simply taking this approach to change our own lives for the better and grow to make it what we do for others too. We need to learn then to act with greater purpose in everything we do. The people we know, the way we interact, with purpose. Why? When you're talking to somebody, you're getting together, what are you doing for them that is spiritual, that is good for them? So to do this, make every action you can, every interaction, make it spiritually beneficial in some way. Every person you meet can benefit from you spiritually, whether through your spiritual knowledge, your spiritual encouragement, or your spiritual behavior, that you're different. But to make the most of this, you must think spiritually about the person in front of you in the first place. What does that person need? What do they need to see from me, hear from me? What do they need me to do for them that will help them spiritually? When Jesus sat by the well in Samaria, tired and thirsty, he could have been distracted by those things or just made excuses. And instead, he turned his need for water toward the woman's need for the gospel, which in turn led to a whole area learning about Jesus in John 4. When Peter and John were approaching the temple, a man asked for financial help. And instead, they saw beyond his request to something greater, and they, in a miraculous age, healed him, which created a powerful opportunity to preach the gospel in Acts chapter 3. Now for us, is this going to take some creativity at times to figure out how do we get from where we are in this conversation, what we're talking about, to where they need to be and where I can really help them? Well, sure. But first, it takes a heart for others and a mind that's centered on the spiritual, where we can connect what we're thinking about with what that and our care for that person and connect the two. That's what's often missing. To do that, you need to prioritize, maximize, and integrate spiritual activity. Easy way to say that, you need to redeem the time and make the best use of your time. Ephesians chapter 5, 15 and 16. So change how you measure your participation. We've come to look at our job. It's a 40-hour work week or thereabouts. And Christianity is a 4-hour assembly week. And don't tell me that's not how we think. Why can we not change the world? Because we've only given ourselves 4 hours to do it, and that's in this building. That's not where you're going to have the greatest impact. It's when you leave this building. Christianity is meant to dominate you and your life every day, and through you make an amazing difference in the lives around you. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be you steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, inasmuch as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. 1 Corinthians 15:58. This is not a matter of job, it's a matter of focus. And to accomplish this, we need to treat all people as souls with value. with no exception. Matthew 16:26. Every soul has given up on self in their sin. And we're trying to show them not to give up any longer. To show them the way out, to show them God wants them back. We've developed a kind of all or nothing attitude, though, toward Christian interaction. We think if we cannot hit a home run spiritually that it's not worth even trying. We'll go and assess the person as to whether or not how hard it'll be to teach them what they are doing, whether or not there's a good chance before we'll talk to them. That is completely opposite of what we should be doing. Every interaction we have is an opportunity to help that person be a little bit closer to where they need to be spiritually. Every interaction. You may not be the person who gets a Bible study with someone, but you may be the one that gets them thinking about it and never knows it. You may not be the person who does the Bible study, but you are the one who convinced them to talk. You may not be the person who baptized them, but you conducted the Bible study. And you may not be the person who did the baptism, but you may be the person who became the friend and worked with them in the church. Measure what you do with a far greater understanding of the long-term impact you can have. And are you doing what you can do in that moment to get people closer to God? And this is the core approach that we should have in all our works as Christians. Do good to people to create a safe environment for them so that it can become a saving environment for them. That's the purpose of benevolence in the first place. James chapter 2, 17 and 18. To show them we're trying to take care of you so that they see that when we come to them with the gospel. Study the Bible with people to help them move from feeling safe to being saved. That's evangelism. Mark 16, 15, and 16. There are a lot of people that feel safe and have no business feeling safe. They need to be saved. It's those interactions we have with them that are making the difference if we do so with purpose. Invest then, thirdly, your time, love, and wisdom in your brethren to keep them and strengthen them so there's never going to be any question about losing them. That's edification. Galatians chapter 5, 13, that we are serving one another by love. Brethren, change your participation in spiritual work from something you just do periodically to an integral part of your daily life. Number 4, consistently advance the cause of Christ. Make that your aim. It's very exciting to see a congregation of God's people who are busy in the work of the Lord. Usually this happens when people have had some new challenges and new opportunities, whether, listen up, a new preacher, a recent gospel meeting, or something else. And there's nothing wrong with that at all, but it can be hard to sustain. But that's what should be our goal. We must make the transition from a people whose work is up and down to a consistent, steady drumbeat of doing God's work. But to get there, we must become consistent in how we approach everything we do, because that's where we're failing. To do that, brethren, keep your eye on a consistent purpose, and it's this: to save souls and to go to heaven. You keep that before you. Even when in prison, Paul was looking to advance the cause of Christ, the furtherance of the gospel, Philippians chapter 1 and verse 12, progress in the gospel. And this is progress that we should be how we measure what we are doing as God's people. Are we moving them and ourselves toward heaven? Philippians chapter 3, verses 13 and 14. But once we've got that vision set, we need to live with consistent visibility. Friends, we need to maximize, not minimize, our spiritual visibility in the world. Listen to what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, 14 through 16. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid, neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but upon a candlestick, that it might give light to all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. People need to see not only the strength of our convictions, but also the reason for them. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. Godly living without compromise in every way can have a tremendous effect because we are willing to be different because of our God. 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 10. That's addressing modesty of women who profess good works. Only visibility and availability can lead to greater influence of those around us. And that's hard today because we've all moved indoors. We're not out, shouting at one another as we're changing wash on the line anymore. We're not sitting on front porches, are we? Don't do that anymore. Everyone's inside. Now everyone's inside and they're doing their work and they don't ever leave home. And that means we really have to maximize our opportunities. It also means that people, whether they realize it or not, are starved for strong relationships. You have one to offer them. But that means you have to be consistent in your commitment. Titus 3 and verse 8. This is a faithful saying, and these things I want you to affirm constantly, that those who have believed in God should be careful to maintain good works. That word means to put them out there consistently. These things are good and profitable to men. Like Daniel, our behavior should create a pattern that even the ungodly can recognize because it stands out against the backdrop of the world, Titus 2 and verse 7. That takes patience and persistence, Romans 2 verse 7. It takes diligence in the midst of weariness. Do not be weary in well-doing. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9. It takes endurance in the face of adversity. But in these hardships of darkness, it's easier for people to see the light in your life. But we have to be consistent in our work of the Lord. When and where do we reach out with the gospel? Matthew chapter 28, 18 through 20 tells us, while going. Wherever you are, there's an opportunity. When and where do we reach out to do good? As ye therefore have opportunity, let us do good. Galatians 6 and verse 10. When and where do we try to strengthen other Christians? Let us consider one another. Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 24. In each case, it's a matter of a mindfulness about why we're doing this in the first place and how we're living, and that we're ready for the opportunities when they're before us. All the time is a good time to do the work of the Lord. But we must acknowledge that it's going to require consistent motivation, but God's taking care of that for us. But God committeth his love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us, Romans 5 verse 8. And loving others is just an extension of that love that we see and have learned from God himself, Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 through 40. How can we possibly do all of this? Does this sound overwhelming to you? It might. If you think you're doing all of it all the time. But if you're listening carefully, it's about being mindful of all of these things so that when opportunity is there, you're ready, you're willing, and you're able. You can't always teach someone a lesson because you're right in the middle of work. It's the readiness to think in the midst of conversations or whoever you're around, what am I teaching them by the way I conduct myself as I do this? And now I've set the tone for when they have a question or they want to know, or I'm simply inviting them to do something. Everything you do is a learning opportunity for someone and a growth opportunity for you. When we can make these things habits until they were more than just habits, habits will go away because we don't put thought into them. Let godly activity permeate your very being until it is firmly written on the character of your heart. Then it's no longer a habit. It's who you are. And when you are this kind of person, you will have an impact far beyond just someone who shows up on a work day. God designed Christians to be workers. He created man to work, Genesis chapter 2 and verse 15. And that itself is a reflection of the character of God, who in creating was doing work, Genesis chapter 2 and verse 2. Jesus himself echoed this sentiment when he said, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no man can work, John 9 and verse 4. But we have so compartmentalized our thinking that we've distanced ourselves from some of the very things that should define us as a people. The work of a member of the Lord's church has become noticeably active in his Christianity when he's not here, as he is active in the congregation when he is here. And that's going to look a little bit different depending upon where you are in life, the nature of the community in which you live, and what opportunities you have around you. It'll look a little bit different. But at its core, it will always reflect a high interest in souls, a high view of the gospel, a high priority in the life of people who love God, and the highest effort you can give. God designed his church to be his workforce in the world. It's time we accepted it. It's time we trained for it. And it's time we lived like it. In Luke 10 and verse 2, Jesus said to them, the harvest truly is great, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. There are people who've never really heard about Jesus. And you can tell them. To tell them of the beauty of the power of the gospel as a message from God, Romans 10:17, to create faith, John 8 verse 24, to change lives in correcting us, Acts 17 verse 30, to profess him in standing up for him verbally, Romans 10:9 and 10, and to obey him beginning at baptism so we can be forgiven of our sins, Acts 2 verse 38. It's not hard to walk people through that. What's hard is living in such a way that we're ready to get that in front of people by the way we live before we don't ever have to say it. We have an opportunity for just a few short years upon this earth to make the most of it for the God who created us, the one who died for us, and the one who will judge us. We're here to do his work. Let's be his people and do his work from this point forward. If you are subject to the invitation for whatever reason, won't you please come while we stand and sing?